Hey there, welcome back to the Complicated Kids podcast. I'm your host, Gabriele Nicolet. I am a toddler whisperer, a speech therapist, and a parent coach. And today I have Dr. Gila with me. Dr. Gila, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm so happy to have you because you have a very unique specialty. And actually, I'm going to let you tell the good people about yourself and your specialty, and then also why you have this
Mm,
specialty.
yeah, sure. So I started out my career as a psychologist and a neuropsychologist. And what I like to say, hopefully this is reassuring, is that even with all of my fancy degrees and training, it was still really challenging. It has been challenging to single parent a beautifully complex kiddo who went through some struggles and challenges, as all our kids do. And so I took a deep dive to really figure out sort of how to parent him the way that he needs and deserves in a way that's aligned with my own parenting values, which of course involved figuring out, I had a sense for my parenting values, but this deep dive process really has been so eye-opening. And I feel like I have grown so much as a person, a human, a clinician, and as a parent. And so I became really passionate about supporting other parents. I became a JAI certified parenting coach and a certified clinic coach. And now I'm also doing workshops in schools in partnership with GoZen. And I'm just really passionate about spreading a lot of the same messages that you do. One of my taglines is single parenting with connection, not perfection. And that really is my passion.
It is, talk about connection versus perfection for a second. Why? Why that?
Yeah. So I'm going to start with perfection and I think that as parents, and a lot of us are sort of perfectionists at heart, recovering perfectionists. And of course we are with our kids because this is the most important job, right? I mean, and yet no one gives you a manual, no one gives you a, training course, you don't get a degree in parenting. You have to figure it out on the job. And of course we want to do the best that we can. And so it's so common to fall into this perfectionist trap. Um, and then of course comes with it the shame spiral because none of us is perfect, right? And you're inevitably going to make mistakes. And so one message that I say in pretty much every interview I do is that, you know, perfectionism, being perfect is not the goal for two reasons. And one is that it's not realistic. We all know this, right? We are human, we are parents. You may be a single parent if you're listening to this. And society just isn't set up to support parents in general. And it's certainly not set up to support single parents. And so it makes sense if you struggle, and it makes sense if you make mistakes. The second piece of it, though, is that even if it was realistic, like I don't even know what it means to be a perfect parent, but let's say there was this thing called the perfect parent. Even if it was realistic, it's not desirable because if we were perfect, whatever that means, we would not be modeling for our kids that being human is being imperfect, that it makes sense if you're struggling sometimes, that it makes sense if you're making mistakes. And we wouldn't have the opportunity to model how you repair and reconnect and recover afterwards. So it's sort of this gift in a way. Now, of course, I'm talking, within reason, right? We're not talking about abuse and things like that, but we're talking about your day-to-day parenting imperfections. As it's so much easier. I think we tell our kids often mistakes are how you learn. But we don't remember that for ourselves, and we don't give ourselves that same grace and that same compassion. And I can tell you that some of my toughest parenting moments where I have done and said things that I regret have been my biggest learning moments and have made me a better parent.
There's so much in what you just said that I just has me going, which one of which is if we are trying to model perfection, that is like such a terrible example to set in front of our children because number one, they already developmentally, up to a certain point, think that we are perfect. That's
Mm-hmm.
survival in action, right? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
I need you to be the dependable person who keeps me alive. And
Mm-hmm.
therefore, I will contort everything in my reality to make you be that person. And so that's not feasible, as you said. But also, we're not we cannot actually tell people, other people, it's okay to make a mistake while appearing never to make a mistake ourselves. It's a total mismatch. And if you're going to talk about the connection piece next, which I hope we
Yeah.
will,
Yeah.
that's actually a breaking of connection. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, that makes me think of so one of the like, we have a lot, society gives us a lot of these like hard and fast rules that we internalize as parents. And I think one of them is you can never, ever, 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 ever um, drop an expectation or compromise when there is like a power struggle and a conflict. And it's the same thing as you just said, right? We are standing here firmly expecting our 5-year-old to have the flexibility that we are not giving ourselves permission to have.
Full body chills, full body chills. Keep going because people will listen to this and be like, but I have to. I
Right.
have to hold boundaries and I have to teach about respect,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
keep talking.
Yes. I love that you just used the word respect, right? So I use the word connection-based parenting to describe my parenting, but really I think the best descriptor is respectful parenting. But the reason I don't use that term is because respect is, I think, like the most misused and misunderstood and misconnotated word out there because it's used to mean, deference and compliance and right? It's not used to mean what how I define it, which is when you respect someone, you see and treat their experience and their perspective and their voice as valid and worthy, right? And so if we define it like that, then in that power struggle, our child has a valid and worthy perspective and voice. And this does not mean that you always give them exactly what they want, right? Like, this does not mean they are in charge and you don't have any boundaries and you don't have any limits and you don't have any expectations. But it does mean that sometimes your child may be giving you new information, is how I like to think of it and how I phrase it for my kiddo. That is new information. I did not realize that this was so hard for you in this moment,
Mm.
right? And so maybe it's still a boundary and a limit that you have to uphold because in this moment, like, even if it's hard for you, you still need to go to the doctor, right? So that would be like, I know this is hard and I'm going to support you through that hard piece of it. And it still needs to happen. But there's other times where you might realize, oh, I just set this limit or expectation like a knee jerk reaction. And now I am dying on this hill that I don't actually care that much about. And if I look at my child's experience as valid and worthy, that can inform that sort of internal evaluation process of, okay, maybe in this moment, I can compromise here. Maybe we can find something that meets both of our needs. Right?
There's so much self-awareness that's required of an adult in that
Yes.
situation that you're just describing. And what I
Yes.
say to parents sometimes is in those moments, there's actually three of you in that interaction. There's your child, and then there's your adult self, and then there's your child self that's coming out to play in
Mm-hmm.
ways that you don't even realize half the time because that little one didn't get the respect often
Yes.
that
Mm-hmm.
it wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's coming up. If you want to go to parts there, parts work, we can do that too. But like there's this
Yeah.
little part of you that's saying, well, hey, I didn't get that, so they shouldn't have it either.
Yeah. It's so true. And I like to tell people about how, so I have a model that I use with my own kiddo and with my clients. And the idea is that we each have this internal sink, this metaphorical sink. And when the sink is full, just a few more drops of water make it overflow. And that's that dysregulation.
Mhm.
When the sink is emptier, the same exact drops of water that made it overflow in the first scenario, you're going to be able to handle it and even more, right? And so when your sink is emptier, you can handle more. And one of the things that fills your sink really quickly and makes it overflow is somebody else's sink overflowing into yours, right? And that's what happens when our kiddos are having a hard time, their sink overflows into ours. And when our sink is overflowing, it overflows into our kiddos' sinks, right? And so learning and understanding where your sink is such a big piece of it. But the reason I bring this up now is that when your sink is really full, what happens in the brain, a few things, but one of the things is that you have less cognitive control, as we call it. And that means that you are now relying more on sort of the well-worn pathways, the things that you're just sort of like deeply ingrained with and used to. And a lot of that is what you grew up with. It's those internal narratives. And so you hear your parents' voice coming out of your mouth, the things you always said, I will never say that. And suddenly you are saying it, and you can hear, like, you actually sound like them, the tone, the intonation, right? We've all done it. And if that's happening for you and it's happening a lot, I want to normalize that and say there's a reason, there's a neuroscientific reason, and it makes sense, and we can shift it. It takes work, but we can shift it.
I want to call out, you've done it twice that I'm aware of so far, and I just want to point it out to people because it's significant. It is a tiny little word that you're using. The word is
Hmm.
and not but.
Mm-hmm.
And I really want to highlight it. And if you missed it earlier, go back, rewind to just a couple of minutes when you were talking about validating and holding a boundary.
Mm-hmm.
Because it gets into, and the reason I'm pointing it out here is because it's a real illustration of, number one, the complexity, number two, the nuance,
Mm-hmm.
and the both and quality of all of these interactions with our kids. They are both completely annoying and completely wonderful. They are
Mm-hmm.
both testing limits and learning about limits. And so it's
Yeah.
all in there together. And when we understand that, I think it just helps us hold it a little bit more loosely because it's not an either or, almost
Yeah.
never.
Yeah. That's so true. And right, this sort of the black and white thinking, it's one of the big brain traps we all fall into, right? And one thing that what you just said makes me think of is, I have what I call a beautifully complex kid, a strong-willed kid. I've struggled with what adjectives to use, but one thing I like to say is our strong-willed kids demand the kind of respect every child deserves,
Yep.
right?
Yes.
and and one of the biggest sort of growth processes for me and for a lot of my clients is learning to see this strong will as, yes, it's hard for us as parents, maybe even annoying, frustrating, exasperating, and it's a beautiful strength that we actually want to foster, right? I think most parents, if you ask them, they would say, I want to raise a child who becomes an adult who is self aware and self advocates, right? And this is what our strong willed kids are doing. Now,
who
they can
has
work
who
on,
yeah who has
yeah,
healthy boundaries, who
healthy
knows how to
boundaries.
say no, who
Hmm.
prioritizes themselves and their safety and their mental health
Hmm. And demands respect,
and
right?
demands.
And yes, we can work on the how, right? They could use our support and our scaffolding around how they self-advocate. And it's a beautiful skill that they have innately that I think a lot of us as adults, and you talked about, right, that inner child, a lot of us had that as inner children, and it was squelched, it was pushed down, right? And so thinking about the kernels of that we want to really foster while holding space for, it's hard, right? There's there's no doubt about it. It is hard, and it is a beautiful gift in a way.
It's so interesting. You're saying so many of the same things that I deeply believe. One of which is these challenging, spirited children
Mm-hmm.
are they have almost put themselves in a position where they cannot go along to get along. They cannot comply. Their
Mm-hmm.
neurobiology will not allow them to comply for
Yeah.
compliance's sake. If they could, they would.
Yeah.
And therefore, then it throws it squarely back onto the parents, which is very confronting in many
Mm-hmm.
cases.
Mm-hmm.
I call them orchid kids, complicated kids. They do this early, they do
Yeah.
it often,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and they will persist. And again, this
Mm-hmm.
persistence is another quality that we want our adult children to have. But I literally had a client tell me this week, like, that's all fine and good for an adult, but I don't want a 5-year-old who has these qualities. And I kind of, I was, maybe I handled it diplomatically. I don't actually remember, but my point was like, well, you can't have one without the other. You
No.
cannot not allow a 2-year-old to say no. In other words, you can't prevent your 2-year-old from saying no and expect that child to grow up to be an adult who tells a predator no.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That direct in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah. And this all brings us back to that connection piece that we were
Mm,
going to get to, right? Because so I think of if your relationship with your child were a house, respect would be like that concrete
mm,
foundation that it's built
mm,
on. And connection is the raw materials. It's the lumber, the bricks, right? Connection is how we make it
mm,
happen.
mm,
And what tends to happen when we have these strong-willed kids and we are stressed out, our sinks are really full all the time, is we get into this imbalanced relationship where there's just sort of this constant push and pull, this constant tension. And so, one of the things we've talked about already is working on some flexibility in the system and sort of acknowledging your child's perspective and giving them some of that agency, that voice, right? And then another piece is intentionally building in connection because connection. So, another thing I like to say often is you are your child's greatest asset, and your connection with them is the best tool they have in their resilience toolkit, right? You can help them build the emotional intelligence, the skills. Now, I know this then feels like a lot of pressure and it is a lot of responsibility, right? And I'm not going to lie, it is a lot of responsibility. If you're the only adult in the house, that feels even more like a lot of responsibility, which is then where I remind you it's not about being perfect,
And you're
right?
going to tap right into, I mean, I could feel it as you were just talking. You're going to tap right into that worthiness piece,
Mm,
right? Which is like, how am I worthy, able,
yeah.
who decided that
Mm,
I was capable of being this child's parent? I mean, you
yeah.
get very deep very quickly as soon as you start doing this connection
Mm-hmm.
piece, right? That I
And
am my
there's the
child.
inner child, right? That inner child who says, well, I'm not capable and worthy. I needed help with everything. My opinion was not valid and worthy.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so
So
then there's
this,
cleanup work there sometimes, yeah?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So you're getting all my frame. I'm throwing all these frameworks at you, but another framework so I think of the parenting journey as being like a tree.
Mm,
And it has three main pieces.
mm,
The roots are the parent piece. This is really working on our stuff, right? Our values as parents, our mission and vision as parents, and also the stuff that comes up because stuff comes up for all of us, right? And if you think of a tree, if you have these like really strongly rooted roots and they can be gnarly and knotted and twisted and turned, but if they're deeply rooted in the ground, then when the wind blows and you get a big storm, it's not going to topple over. And so that parent piece is so important to work on. And it's not the only piece. And trees don't grow by laying down roots and then, okay, check that off the box. Now we're going to grow the trunk. Check that off the box, right? They grow, everything grows together and it informs each other. And so, really working on the parent piece, the roots, the child piece, understanding your unique child in front of you. That's the empowered, strong trunk piece.
Mm-hmm.
And then the connection piece, your relationship, the branches, right? And individual leaves, like, getting your kid to brush their teeth because there's a angry tiger in their mouth who is hungry, that is an individual leaf that might work in one season and then not in another season. But the concept, the connection, the playfulness, the communication, those branches are going to be with you. And you can grow more as you evolve.
It's so beautiful. I love it. I saw it. I saw in my
Thank
mind, I
you.
saw all of the pieces interacting. I love that idea that, yeah, the leaves might be around for a season and then not. So many
Yeah.
times parents are coming to me and saying, well, this used to work. How come it doesn't work anymore? It's like, because it's a
I
dynamic
know.
system.
It's so maddening. I had it figured out.
Yeah. And then they're going to
It's hard
change
to change.
again. Yeah.
I know. I
Oh
know.
man.
It's so tough. And I
Um,
want to mention,
yeah.
because we were talking about the importance of the parent piece,
Mhm.
one reason why I talk about the tree is that I think there's been a bit of a pendulum swing where we used to have a lot of, there's something wrong with my child. I need to fix my child. And there's been this sort of awareness of the parent work that needs to happen. But I've noticed a pendulum swing a little too far, which is that then there becomes this narrative of if I could just regulate myself, it would be unicorns and rainbows, right? That's all that matters. I just need to work on my stuff. And while that stuff is important, it is also, I think, important to recognize that your stuff isn't the only thing going on for your kiddo. There's other things going on. And if we don't really look at that and understand what their neurotype is, what their needs are, what their personality is, then we're missing an important piece of it.
There's also this piece as you're talking, because there are multiple people in a family system.
Mm-hmm.
And I was talking to a family who has three children, two parents, and a nanny. Um,
Mm-hmm.
that's a lot of moving parts. And
Yeah,
one of the biggest issues that they're facing right now is that it feels like the two younger children don't get enough airtime. And that's real. They
it is.
don't, and maybe enough is the wrong word because we're going to sort of let everybody have their own experience within the family, but they don't get a lot of airtime. And so,
Yeah,
how do we accommodate our needs, our
yeah,
complicated, challenging kiddos' needs, everybody else's needs in the mix without feeling like we're sacrificing or constantly kind of swinging this pendulum back and forth. And I think for my money, one of the things is you don't always, and that's okay.
mm-hmm. Right.
But
Yeah.
maybe you have some other things to say about that.
Yeah, so many things. So I'll just touch on a few. So one is I agree. There is in parenting, I think, and certainly in single parenting, there are a lot of what I call inconvenient truths. Sorry, Al Gore, I'm co-opting it. So this is an inconvenient truth, which is that you have more needs than you can meet at all times, right? It is legitimately hard. I say this to single parents all the time, right? If it feels hard, it's partly because it absolutely is hard. And again, we are in a system, we're functioning in a system that does not set us up for success. It does not support us. And that's not something that you can fix, right? And that is hard. And so there is a degree of acceptance and sort of making the best of it. Having said that, there are also things that I think we can do that we do have control over. So, right, the only thing we can control is our own behavior. Um, and one thing that I think is often the case is that, again, I don't mean to be so like down on society, but I think that there's a lot of societal expectations that we internalize. Um, and so we do a lot of things because we quote unquote should or need to. that don't really serve our family and our needs. And so there is a big piece, and this is something for a lot of single parents that I think is a big piece of it, is really prioritizing, giving yourself permission to prioritize based on your values and your family's needs. So in a family that has three kiddos, do they have an after school activity every single day and they're trying to do all the things and they're, chair of this committee and that? And are there things that we can let go of when you look at it and you say, is this more important than really sort of feeding that connection with my child? If I could buy this hour where I could spend it with one kid one-on-one, right? Once a week, is that worth it? And we often don't sort of stop and look at our lives like that. I was just thinking it's spring now. The weather hasn't decided if it's spring, but it is spring. And I think there can be this like spring cleaning of our commitments and our priorities of, is this working? Is this serving my family in the way that it needs to? And it doesn't have to be a forever thing, right? It might be in this season of life, you can't do as much. And down the road, you'll be able to do more outside the home, but really having a look at it with your own values in mind and giving yourself permission to prioritize what meets your family's needs.
And I think, yes, and some people are going to have, they're going to have the yeah buts. Yeah, but I have to do this. Yes, but I have to. And
Yep.
that's where working with a parent
Mm-hmm.
coach
Mm-hmm.
is a really helpful thing, because it's
Mm-hmm.
our job to not believe anything that that the
Mm-hmm.
client says, right? And to kind of to tease at it from all of the different angles. And one of the most basic examples I often say to people is when they say, well, I have to take care of my kids. I say, no, you don't.
Mm.
You actually do not have to take care of your children. You choose to take, can we acknowledge that you choose to take care of them because you don't want them to be taken away by child protective services at like a
Mm.
minimum baseline level, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's choice there,
Yeah, I love that sort of radical mindset shift. Yes.
right?
Yes, and I agree. I talk about how, right, if you can even shift for yourself the I have to I want to
Mhm,
or I get to,
mhm.
um if you can do it authentically. There are things that you have to do, right? Like, I don't know, eat food, drink water.
I mean,
You don't have to eat certain food, but if you want to survive, I guess, I want to live, so I need to drink water,
I
right?
mean, when you get all the way
Yeah,
down,
you're right.
it blows it right up. And
Everything
that's what
is a choice.
everything is a
Mhm.
choice.
It's true.
And there's, you can roll your eyes and say, okay, it's semantic, but there is power there
Yes.
from which to then take action that is constructive, that might be novel,
Yes.
that can take you in a little bit of I've got full body chills right now, that can take you in a little bit of a different direction, that's more of a
Yeah.
course correction that just feels better.
Yeah, it's true. And sometimes if you can't authentically say to yourself, I want to or I get to,
Mhm.
sometimes there's a so that you can embody more authentically, right? So you might not want to drive your kid to soccer practice, but I I want to drive my kid to soccer practice so that he can run around in the fresh air and enjoy being with his friends. And you can then access the want to more easily, more authentically with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I am in the coaching program that I attended, that there are these bridging thoughts, and so you can like
Yeah.
plug in, right, the so that, or I'm
Yeah.
willing to believe, someday I
Mhm.
might think. You can sort of put all these
Mhm.
qualifiers on something to make it be true,
Yeah.
and feel better than I I have to take my son to soccer practice. That's such a
Yeah.
closed, stagnant feeling,
Yeah.
versus, yeah, I have to take my son to soccer practice so that he can run around. That just opens it right up.
Right. And you may not have to take him to soccer practice. That was probably not the best example, but Right. So giving yourself permission. Yeah, I love what you brought up, right? This sort of radical mindset shift. I have to say, my son's dad, I think one of the positives that I took from that relationship, we come from very different backgrounds, and we have very different sort of that internalized narrative of what you have to do and what this is just how it is was very different. And it did sort of give me this like radical aha moment of, wait, that isn't how it has to be. Huh.
Yeah, I mean,
Right?
we walk around most of the time thinking that we're just like reporting on the weather,
Mm-hmm.
right? Well, I have to let my kid go to a sleepover. I have to get my kid a
Mm-hmm.
smartphone when they ask me for it. I have to,
Mm-hmm.
like whatever the thing is that really is like, oh, I don't want to do that. It doesn't feel right, doesn't feel
Mm-hmm.
authentic, doesn't feel like it matches my values.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute you can come into, actually, I don't have to do that. That's a program
Yeah.
that's running. It's not mine, number one. Number
Yeah.
two, like there isn't a have to in this situation.
Yeah.
Then you free yourself to make a decision. Now, then
Yeah.
you have to like withstand the judgments of
I
other
was just gonna
people.
say, I want to acknowledge that this is easier said than done
Yes.
because it is very, very hard to go up against the external narratives that are still going to be there, right? And as a single parent, you're already living a life that is not approved by much of society, certainly not supported by much of society. And if you're parenting a complex kiddo, you are probably also living some truths and doing some things in parenting. And if you are doing connection based parenting, you are already going against the grain, against the norm. And there is a lot of judgment out there. And I want to acknowledge that it is. And that is a challenge. And that's part of why I think it is so powerful and important to be in community and in spaces, even if it's virtual, where you are not alone in that experience, where you are with other people who get it and who do have similar values and perspective, because it is so hard when you feel like you're the only one.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, as I said before we got on camera and hit record, we could talk for hours.
I know.
This is a good time to pin this conversation and let the people know how they can find you, how they can find, I suspect, your community, and all of those things. So would you do that,
Yeah.
please?
Yeah, sure. So my website is drgilaparenting.com, and I have some free resources, including a guided meditation for single parents, but you are welcome to listen to it if you're not a single parent. I hear all the time, I am not a single parent, but I sure as heck feel like one, right? And I absolutely know how that feels. I also have a printable guide that talks about understanding why challenging behaviors like meltdowns and tantrums and rages happen. So you can go ahead and grab those. I did just host a summit, and the Facebook group, people were just so loving
Mm.
being in community with single parents. And so I am keeping that group open. It is now called Single Parenting with Connection, Not Perfection. So I'd love for you to join, love to have you in that community. And yeah, if you want to connect, I would love to do that.
Perfect. And we will link to the website and all of that good stuff in the show notes. Dr. Gila, thank you for coming.
Yeah, thank you. I think we're very aligned, and it's so great chatting and sharing ideas.
This
Yeah.
was really fun. Thank you.
Mm.